What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here, and patch 10.11 is here for League of Legends. I decided to dress up for the occasion. I've got a nice tie on. It's beautiful. There's a pocket. It holds stuff like a pen or something. Who knows? It could be anything, even a boat. Anyway, patch 10.11 exists, and I actually like this patch. It's cool. It finally gives us some more interesting kind of systems level changes, which is cool. It's something to dig our teeth into a little bit more, because it's not just simply, you know, the attempted 1% win rate change back and forth. So, okay, let's scroll all the way down. We can see that Fiddlesticks, Gangplank, Hecarim, Caixa, and Lux are getting buffed. Graves, Janna, Syndra, and Talon are getting nerfed. Also, all the marksmen are getting buffed, and there's some skins. Okay, Volibear is new and exists. You can, of course, click all these links. The patch notes will be linked down below. You can go click these links yourself and figure out more about it. But this is, I think, going to be fairly interesting. Volibear is a character where I believe the kit direction is something to the effect of it can be hard to reach someone, but once you reach them, you win. It is a little bit Darius-esque in that regard, where like if Darius gets on you and you're squishy, you probably don't have a way out unless your name is Akali, in which case you can get away from everything. But otherwise, Volibear is like, hey, if he reaches you, you know, good luck, have fun dealing with it. Which I think is totally fine, right? Like, this is, you know, a Juggernaut class character where, by definition, they have low mobility, they have fairly low crowd control, and their output needs to be killing things. And being a Juggernaut, there's not a lot of finesse with this kind of character. So, you know, I think that's fine. I think it's a decent place to position a champion. And hopefully Volibear's cool. Hopefully he's fun. Good luck. All right, Fiddlesticks is getting some small buffs. So basically, I believe him turning into a scarecrow, like him getting his effigy sort of passive, now takes 2 seconds. So that's going to be slower. That's going to be, I guess, a nerf technically. However, he now gets to terrify enemies if he is posing as an effigy. That's the big thing, right? Is that now, if you decide to pretend that you're a ward and chill out here and T-pose for a while, you get that extra fear effect, which is kind of cool. So that's good. Because that's like the passive on how the Q works in the first place. It also works, right, because normally it's, if I have it right, is if you were coming out from stealth, you get the fear. Now it's if you hit them as the T-pose, you get the fear. That can be really, really effective. Obviously, you can land your E or your W or something and get some value out of that one. Also want to point out that he is a better laner now. So technically, you could argue that this is a slight buff to Jungle Fiddlesticks, since he has... you know, theoretically this can be used at some point in a fight, but it's primarily a 50% damage increase to lane minions. Now, of course, this can also buff Jungle Fiddle. When he ganks a lane and then goes to tax it and go back, he's going to kill those monsters 50% faster. That is definitely not trivial. Yeah, I mean, just overall, hey, it's more damage here. Better landing powers. This can mean quite a lot. I have not been tracking lane Fiddlesticks really at all. I don't know if you're going to max W first or anything, if this is like, you know, the really big wave clear stuff. My understanding was support Fiddle was very frequently E-max, but this is something that I'm out of date on and don't really know, and don't know if it will change, so my apologies for not having that one ready. Next up, though, we go to Gangplank. Gangplank gets a pretty moderate base attack speed bonus. Also, Gangplank's barrels no longer stack sheen when chained. Okay, interesting. Good to know. Oh, I understand. They were stacking the sheen bonus damage. So I believe that means it was like giving you sheen damage once, then twice, then 3 times, which is obviously very absurd if I'm reading this correctly. That is a really big deal, considering this is a champion that basically always rushes Triforce. If you were ever getting a 2-barrel chain or a 3-barrel chain, that was adding 150 or 300 or so damage, which is obviously outlandishly good. So that could end up being a really, really big deal. I would say a pretty moderate amount. I would say maybe 40%-ish. It's probably less than that. I think there's actually a lot of 1-barrel blowups, but a non-trivial amount of Gangplank's barrels were chained powder kegs that hit champions. Even the ones that hit, you know, minions, it matters. You can sometimes get, you know, sometimes it's worth chaining a barrel into a minion. Oftentimes you can just get 1 barrel to do it, so it wasn't, you know, all the time. Like most wave clear is 1 barrel, but regardless, this is obviously a nerf. I would argue this is probably a bigger nerf than this is a buff. It is a base attack speed buff. Gangplank's overall top lane win rate is just shy of 49%, so a champion that you could probably comfortably buff, and that would be okay. And so basically here is the sort of table of how much attack speed the champion has without buying any items. Obviously, if you buy Triforce, that's, I believe, 30% on the item, so this goes, the sort of These numbers are all going to be 30%-ish higher, but the end result is still the same. Gangplank has 5% more attack speed, no matter what you do. Unless you got to the point where you would overcap, which is just not realistic on Gangplank. Gangplank has 5% more attack speed. So if Gangplank has 5% more melee DPS, right? If you're in a battle where you're scrapping and fighting back and forth, 5% more damage from Gangplank. That's not garbage. That certainly exists, especially if you are in a melee matchup. Like, it's gonna be hard to get your Gangplank barrels to work, or sorry, your Gangplank autos to work against Quinn or Vladimir or something. But if Darius walks at you and you have to fight him back, you have 5% more damage there. That doesn't do nothing. This will end up making your attack frame shorter, so you have your opponents have less room to react to you right-clicking onto a barrel or onto a powder keg. So that has a little bit of gameplay attached to it as well, that you're 5%-ish faster in that regard. So it's something, right? There's a couple of like extra knock-on effects because Gangplank does more than just raw auto attack DPS on stuff. This can help him last hit under turret, great, get the next auto attack down sooner. All that kind of fun knock-on effects you get for an attack speed buff. And it is, again, a 5% attack speed buff no matter how much AS you buy, which can help us melee versus melee combat more than anything else. Still not sure it's a buff compared to Powder Keg, losing some of its Sheen bug synergy. Next up, Graves loses 0.2 bonus attack damage ratio on the first half of Q. The first half of Q obviously is the more reliable part of the spell. Very frequently you could, in fact, dodge the back half. Worth noting that globally, at least in moderately high elo ranked, Graves is the most valuable ban in the game right now. His win rate is reasonably high, and his pick rate is exceptionally high, which means you are actually lowering your opponent's team's win rate the most by banning Graves. That is actually how that's mathematically going to work. Either way, here is the amount of damage. So here's just the ratio on the entire ability, right? It's 86 to 19% is high. That is strictly what the ratio is. Assuming both halves of Q landed, obviously it's 80% is high if it's just simply Q1, because it's 0.8 instead of 1.0, so very easy math there. But even with the entire thing, it's still about 10 to 8% lower, which is at least something. But to kind of add some more context to the math, it is 20 less damage per 100 AD. And so here is the amount of damage that this actually deals in a case where you have, Phage, Warrior Enchant, and Runes, right? It's like, oh, okay, so, level 9 Graves does 20 less damage. The entire Q did 600. It does 20 less than that now. So you can kind of see in a more sort of obvious situation, this is only so big of a nerf. Overall, this is very, very small. This does it does hurt snowballing Graves more than generic Graves. Like, if you never get your build off the ground, you're losing 4 damage and no one cares. But yeah, over time, this can matter, especially in late game scenarios. It's a really, really small nerf. Graves is not going to stop being overpowered, or at least on the strong side, and popular as a result. Next up, we get Hecarim, who is getting 5 to 13 more base damage on the Q. As is the case when you have a very, very small amount of scaling overall, it can be sometimes hard to get the right amount of damage gain. You probably could have done 5 to 25 bonus damage and gone up to 240 here. But that would have also been a very, very large buff. Like 10% more damage is a very large buff, to be clear. So this is, instead of 10% more damage, it's 6% more damage, right? Which is like, okay, that's totally reasonable. I think it's actually, that's actually okay. I think it's arguably appropriately sized, especially because Hecarim is currently actually doing fine. As a jungler, it's 15.5% win rate. I believe as a top laner, that win rate is lower. He's not really much of a top laner right now, but if you're upping the base damage by, 6%, I said it, I was right, hooray, I did it. Again, this could have gone up to 240. It would have been just a pretty much flat 10% at all times. Doesn't have to. Not saying this is what should have happened, but okay, here's the math here. The base damage is 9 to 6% higher. Cool, okay, great. But as a result of the minion math going on, overall the wave clear is lower, right? The minion damage post-damage buff, because of this modifier going from 1/3 off to 40% off, he is actually an objectively weaker top laner as far as wave clear is concerned. Now, PvP combat is also part of top lane, so you can't say he's strictly a weaker top laner. He's weaker at wave clear and better at fighting champions. But of course, as you get more attack damage, right, the AD ratio didn't change at all, and so the minion damage is strictly down 10% as far as this is concerned, right? So yeah, definitely weaker minion wave clear, definitely faster jungle clearing, definitely more PvP damage. Hecarim, again, seems to be in a reasonably acceptable win rate. But I'm guessing, and this is actually a follow-through of something I talked about in the last video, which was talking about champions with acceptable win rates but still getting buffed. I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe part of the metric that they use is not just win rate, but if the win rate is okay, but they're incredibly unpopular, no one's picking or banning the champion, this is a champion that is allowed to be buffed because, right, because Akali must sit at 47% to feel fair, some champion must sit at 53. And you try to find the fairest 53% win rate champion you can. And that's why you can have champions like Annie, or even in this case, maybe Hecarim, where there's not a lot of pick rate, there's no ban rate, someone's got to sit above 50. I mean, actually has to sit above 50. This literally has to happen. Hey, why not Hecarim? No one's playing it anyway. It's okay. I'm, through that lens, fairly comfortable with changes like this. It does, that can like create knock-on questions of like, hey, is Riot just like creating a cycle of OP stuff? But I would also say that this buff is so small. Hecarim is not OP. He's just slightly strong, and I think that's okay because, again, someone has to be, and I think it's okay if Hecarim is. Hecarim has certainly been annoying and frustrating before, so we'll see. We might see Hecarim nerfs in like a patch or two. Next up is Janna losing a pretty substantial amount of W damage, 0 to 20 based on rank. This, of course, does have some base damages on it. W deals damage based on her bonus movement speed through her passive and whatnot, so there is more damage here than what is on the tooltip. That said, the differences are not so big that it really changes the shape of this graph in any way, so I didn't bother doing all the extra math and guessing when you'd buy boots. It just does tend to be worth it. So I didn't in this case. I know I've done this Janna math before, but doing it every single time feels like more work than is beneficial. So yeah, it is a actually pretty meaningful damage nerf. Janna is a champ who tends to max W first. That is the way you tend to lane this champion. Again, there is more base damage here than it initially implies. To the tune of 15-ish, I think is roughly where it was last time I played Janna, which was like 2 days ago. That's what it felt like, at least in the early game. So yeah, okay, it's actually 210 becomes 190 and not 195 becomes 175. This changes the bigger boots you buy and whatnot, but end of the day, it is still a 10-ish% damage nerf. It's not like you buy a lot of AP here. Like, yeah, you probably get Athenes, but that's kind of it. I mean, eventually Ardent Sensor, okay, you get like 100 AP by endgame. Sure, there's some more stuff going on, but this is a really big deal because, right, this is, I mean, certainly you feel it most at level 9, to be clear, and level 9 of support takes quite a while to get to. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of Jannas did, 3 points W, then stopped and maxed shield from this point onwards. So, you actually might stop here at minus 10 damage. But even regardless, sure, her first 2 to 3 levels aren't really nerfed, but her sort of pre-ultimate laning phase is actually losing a moderate amount of damage that you actually should care about. She is one of the very strong supports in the game, arguably number 1. Janna definitely overtuned. Again, I still believe that enchanters tend to get to sit above 50% and feel fair, but because they are objectively very strong, if they get incredibly popular, and if their laning patterns are kind of abusive, not really abusive, but just annoying, like Janna spamming her point and click slow on you, where you literally can't trade back, just W autos you and walks backwards, like, yeah, that's a very annoying trading pattern that you can't really do anything about unless you instant stun her. Oh, and by the way, she Q's Leona, so she didn't stun her. Well, Janna is one of the ones, like, I would say, like, Sona, or even Nami is almost more fair. Like, those, I would say, I'm more comfortable having at high win rates, because you can absolutely pop a Sona, and even though, yes, she just throws auras at people, like, Janna does very obvious things in her trading pattern, where it's like, yeah, okay, Janna probably needs to be a little bit lower than the other enchanters. Yumi is another good example, right, where Yumi is annoying, a specifically annoying enchanter, where the combat pattern is frustrating to deal with. I don't think this is true for all enchanters, but it certainly is true in the case of Janna. Again, I think this is a well-sized nerf. She will stay above 50, and that's okay. All right, we go up to Caixa, who is getting some specific buffs. She's also one of the champions getting buffed down the line, as one of the marksmen getting a bunch of bonus health. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But she's getting a bonus stack damage bump on Icathian Rain, as well as a range bump on the R. Now, there's a typo in my chart down there that will say shield. Don't worry about it. So here is Caixa's Q damage before and after. So the ratio is simply 14% higher. That's the math. Done, right? Going from, what is it? My brain wants to say 7, but then 7 doesn't go cleanly here. Anyway, it's going up 14%. It's going up actually 1/7. That's how I was getting there, right? Because it's 0.05 times 7. It is 1/7 larger. 7.05s versus 8.05s. I knew my brain wanted to say 7. I couldn't figure out why. Yeah, so it is 8/7 as good. As we say this for the third time now, it is 14% better. If you're going to actually have 100 bonus AD, which of course you're going to go for because you want the Q evolve. At the baseline, this ability does 6 to 3% more damage. Obviously, a 0.05 AD ratio increase with 100 AD is 5 damage. This is damage per missile. This can double or so if you are using evolved Q on multiple targets, but I'm just simply doing the damage per missile because the ratios here, the percentages here, will not change based on target selection, number of missiles hit, evolve, any of the above. The 6 to 3% and the 14% here are the same. Now, the more attack damage you buy, the closer to 14% this looks like. So your next 100 AD makes this 6% instead of 3%. At 300 AD, which is unrealistic, it's at 9%. Again, we're not going to see that, but it could be there. And again, it's 5 damage per missile per 100 AD, which again, you're going to do probably, 2x damage in a lot of cases. And so it's 10 more damage per missile, which is, or 10 more damage per cast rather, which is not too bad. Yeah, pretty good, moderately sized buff. Worth pointing out, the win rate here, 48%. Definitely one of the underperforming marksmen. One of the lowest run marksmen in the game right now, so totally deserving of a buff, and I'm glad to see it happen. And the Killer Instinct range, by the way, is better at levels 11 and onwards. Always a fan of trying to play up the assassin aspects of Caixa, right? It's the burst damage of the Q, arguably wave clear as well, but that's okay. And the range at getting in there on the ultimate. Want to point out this means that there's a lot more scaling on the spell now. It actually now fully doubles between rank 1 and rank 3. Not a lot of spells do that, but it doubles. That is a pretty big deal, as opposed to going, plus 1/3 per level. Yeah, this is. I mean, you're gonna have some really, really long range ultis, which is, I think, cool. It's interesting, right? It's fun. This is the kind of ability that I would want to see buffed on Caixa. In general, this is where the power should be, I think, in a lot of cases. A buff to Lux simply slows for 3/4 of extra seconds if you can blow up your E before they leave the radius. It is not the slow linger duration of them leaving, it's the slow linger of you exploding the E, which is definitely really, really meaningful, because in a lot of times, right, you're going to land like a max range E on someone, have to pop it right away. This gives you 3/4 more of a second to position to land your Q or something else. It definitely matters, considering you're trying to pop this for, hitting 3 targets at a time or something like that. In a team fight, getting to slow them for 3/4 more of a second, definitely meaningful. Now, the intent here, and I think what's actually probably going to be true, is that this will tend to be a bigger buff for high elo than average play. And to be fair, I didn't actually look at win rate data on Lux. I think she's doing moderately well. I think she's kind of in the like Annie / what's the name? We just had it a second ago. Hecarim world, where it's like, look, she's actually kind of fine, but could be doing slightly stronger. This champion historically tends to be able to live at slightly high win rates. I don't think it's going to buff her by all that much. I'm going to say under 1%, but this is the kind of stuff that's going to mean more in higher elos. Just in general, capitalizing on on a low duration slow tends to be that kind of thing. So it seems to be a sort of focused buff, as opposed to just like, here's 10 more shielding, have fun, right? It buffs support Lux as well as mid Lux, which is cool. In general, I'm always a fan of this champion being in both roles, even though laning as Lux can be annoying, and I'm honestly pretty bad against her. I just walk into skill shots a lot. It's my bad. Still, I'm generally happy having Lux be in a good spot. Next up, Syndra gets a flat 2 seconds on her E cooldown. Does seem to be a pretty strong performer. Fairly popular pick as well. Want to point out that this win rate in and of itself does not really raise the alarm of, oh my gosh, overpowered champion. Like, very easily, Syndra and Hecarim could switch win rates in this patch, and Hecarim probably doesn't get nerfed right away, but maybe. I mean, I think Hecarim can be annoying. But regardless, it is a pretty meaningful nerf here. This is obviously an ability you max second, so you feel the biggest percentage at level 13. But regardless, a flat 2 seconds is meaningful. It's still up once per wave if you want it. It's still up for every single time there. But if you roam down to bot lane with your Luden's Echo and you cut your cooldown from 12 seconds minus 2.4 down to 9.6, hey, it's still above 10 post-nerf, and that can matter, certainly. Out of the 1.6 seconds on that as a result of 20 CDR. Yeah, you'll just be in situations where you won't get your second stun in a team fight. Sometimes you'll have it, sometimes you won't, and those will be very impactful, not getting to stun a team a second time. So this is, I would say, a pretty moderate nerf to the tune of about 1%, and yeah, I think that's fine. Syndra is definitely one of the more annoying champions, where this is probably one that probably deserves to sit at or slightly below 50% in most cases, because she presses R and clicks on you, and that tends to be a fairly annoying laning pattern or trading pattern or all-in pattern, much like Janna earlier, who just hits W on you in the team in the laning phase. So yeah, one of those champions where it's like, look, the kit probably has to sit slightly low win rate. Speaking of low win rates, not Talon assassins. It's interesting. Assassins tend to get to sit at high win rates, even though people find them annoying. In a lot of cases, assassins still get to sit fairly high. Katarina and Talon are examples of ones that, yeah, eventually raised flags for people, but took kind of a while to get there. Either way, 10 flat mana cost increase on the Q, and the healing on killing a minion with it has been cut down. So Talon, very high win rate champion. One thing that has come to pass, people are doing Q max, and just kind of using that as ways of getting really, really good wave clear, and thus healing for a ton. Obviously you can get into melee range ever. The trading pattern is incredible because that damage is very, very, very high. So yeah, this could be pretty big. Okay, so the mana cost obviously is 1/3 higher, right? 30 becomes 40. Got it. And considering that, if I understand correctly, I'm not much of a Talon player, the reset mechanic on killing a minion is you get half the cooldown back, not mana back. So if you're spamming Q to heal a ton, you will be losing 10 more mana per kill for a while, and that will eventually be felt quite a lot. So that's going to be pretty meaningful, right? If Q max Talon is just spamming Q on minions to heal up all the time, and can't miss last hits because the base damage is so high, yeah, that's going to be a really troubling laning phase to deal with, which is going to be really hard to deal with. I said that twice a little bit. We're gonna. I just realized I have to slightly shake this up. I might have actually missed something earlier. My apologies for some of these being off the screen, but here you go. And we can stretch that back out ever so slightly. I might have missed that somewhere else as well. Let's scroll up. Yeah, that was back on Caixa. It's even worse on Caixa. You know what? It's too late. That's fine. It was easy to see what the Caixa changes were. My apologies for getting some of those wrong. Either way, here is this table, okay? So this is the basic outright healing of the ability. It was 20 plus 3 per level, and now I'm assuming linear scaling from 10 to 70, which means the very early game healing is a lot lower, and then eventually it's like really, really close to the same. Like once you're at mid game, like once you're 6.5, 7 minutes in, you're only losing 7 health per kill, which is not that big of a deal, and it scales up to practically the exact same number. But yeah, you're gonna feel this quite a bit in the very early laning phase. 10-ish less health per minion killed is certainly relevant, right? Absolutely certainly relevant. So, okay. Definite hit towards early laning phase. In that regard, again, costs more mana to cast as well, so you might even heal less often. But I also wanted to include, hey, let's consider this champion's base health regen and assume that Talon kills 6 minions with Q per minute. So he kills roughly half of all minions with Q. Now, I don't know if that's exactly accurate. I just picked the number and went with it. So if you were to kill half of all minions with Q every minute forever, at every level, how much health per minute are you gaining before and after, specifically counting his base health regen? And so, yes, the Q healing is down by half. The direct healing coming in is down by a quarter. And once again, the first 5 levels still down by a solid 15%. Now, certainly potions exist. Doran's shield for regen can exist, and that further flattens this out. There are other mechanics out there that certainly can matter, don't get me wrong, but also things like Ravenous Hunter, Taste of Blood, all that kind of stuff can add more regen. So, hey, there's more stuff out there that might matter. But even counting the base health regen, this is still a pretty moderately sized nerf that really does hit his early laning phase. This is a pretty big hit to Talon. I'm going to say a good 1.5% or so. This is going to be fairly meaningful to his laning phase. He's losing a lot of sustain here. Again, if you're getting half of all minions, you're losing 60 health per minute. That is not trivial in the early game. That's going to be felt because you have to lane for the solid first 6 minutes without recalling in a lot of cases. Not all cases, right? But sometimes you actually wait that long. So yeah, that's a pretty big one. Talon will still be above 50, but yeah, hit pretty hard. Next up, Marksman changes. The Marksman class has major durability problems, especially in the early inning phase where the power feels reliant on their supports, causing gameplay satisfaction issues. Since Marksman's strength relies on a length of time that they're alive, getting to farm in their laning phase, increasing their mobility through items, base health, and then maybe they won't get punished quite as hard and they'll have to bounce back from some more stuff in team fights. Okay. They also decided to change the buffs around for Lucian and Vayne and Tristana, so that they don't, so they can still be all in by someone like Darius, and those champions can be a bit more frail. Okay. So you have a big table of champions that got health changes. Every single champion got 30 base health and 2 health growth. They rounded to the nearest 1. Or rather, they rounded by 1 when possible. They did not round by 2. So, for example, a champion like, there is one around here. Oh, yeah. By the way, these all got pasted wrong. I have the actual numbers, but these all say 500 to 530, 86 to 88. These are obviously not all correct. This is not the case. There are champions who had like 82 health and they kept the 2. Okay. So here's the actual set of tables here. All right, so in basically all cases, the champions got about 6% more health at level 1 and 3% more health at level 18. That tends to be true in almost all cases. Now, in the case of things like regeneration, like Doran's Blade with Lifesteal, or even a Cull if you wanted to, which some people buy, especially at first back, and other sources of Lifesteal, that is essentially functionally health. And so through those terms, the like true durability gain isn't necessarily quite as high. But what it does do is this has now made every single marksman in the game crest over 2,000 health. So there are still some enchanters with under 2,000 health. There are still some mages with under 2,000 health, I believe. There's maybe like 1 or 2. I could be wrong, because mages got compensation back in 2016 or whatever, in the form of scaling health runes. 2017, 18, who knows, whatever. Back when Runes Reforged happened 2 years ago or so. I lose track of time. It's been 10 years doing League of Legends. Actually, 11 at this point almost. Regardless, though, let's move on. Yeah, so 6 to 3% on affiliates. And that will tend to be true in almost all cases. I come on to point out, though, basically that this champ is going to 2,026 max health. I also want to point out, by the way, that Aphelios kind of uniquely has exceptionally low armor and magic resist. I wouldn't have minded seeing Aphelios, instead of gaining 6 to 3% more durability because of health, gained 3% or so more durability through base armor and MR, matching other marksmen. I'm going to go back to a thing I made a while ago, which is if you're making a point of saying, hey, by the way, this champion's squishier than other champions, I think you should do it through the health bar, not through a mechanic that you maybe don't even realize, which is their base armor and MR are unusual. Aphelios is one of like 3 champions with non-standard magic resist. Bet you can't name the other ones. Bet you didn't know Aphelios is one of them. This is why I don't like this mechanic. Whatever, again, this is fine. I think it's okay, but I really would like to see something like that happen at some point. Because I just think it's a really weird way to have the champion be undurable when you could just simply just change their health. And, you know, hey, indeed, low health would have been fine. Whatever, let's move on. Ashe now has a pretty resounding 570 max health. Also crest above 2,000 now. Again, 6 to 3% over time. Caitlyn now above 500 at level 1. Caitlyn has very, very high health growth, right? Starts very, very low, ends actually quite high. So Caitlyn is intentionally frail in the very early game because of her range being so high, which I totally get, but actually ends up scaling to be higher than other marksman durability in the late game, which I just find kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind matching, but I think passing is a little weird. Draven has very, very high baseline durability. You can see like the base health very, very high, above 600, is fairly odd for a marksman, but I think totally reasonable for a champion like Draven, and then scales up above 2,100, which is also, I think, totally reasonable, again, for a champion like Draven, because it's a basically flat 31 health. That is only 5.4 or something percent more health at level 1. Azrael, another fairly frail champion, barely crests 2k, 6 to 3%. Jhin, moderately durable, does have pretty solid ranges, but doesn't have great escape tools. I think it's okay for Jhin to have a bit of a above average health total. And, you know, moderately high health scaling as well puts him above 2,100, which is quite high, even before the buffs. So, yeah, Jin's actually pretty durable overall, which is kind of interesting to note. Jinx, very, very durable at level 1, but actually not the most health scaling overall. So Jinx basically is, and I think this is actually interesting. Like, I'm actually kind of okay with this sort of stat line where it's like, look, Jinx becomes an absolute damage terror in the very, very end game, but the early laning phase is a little mediocre because she doesn't have really that many good tools, right? Zap is very unreliable, so are Flame Choppers, and her other ability is a weak version of Rapid Fire and has 500 base range, or has to spend mana to auto attack at the same range as Ashe, right? Like, I'm totally cool with Jinx having more health than normal at level 1 because I feel like she deserves it based on how kind of mediocre her kit is in the very early game. But yeah, a little bit for early late game because she just sits in rocket form with a Hurricane with 700 range and kills everyone, which, yeah, totally makes sense. Caixa, right, getting buffs on top of the Q-AD ratio and everything else. In general, the squishier a champion is baseline, the more 30 flat plus 2 scaling health matters. So, to be fair, though, Caixa is now a 600 health starter, which is very, very high. Caixa is, I think, a champion that didn't need to have very, very high base stats. That could have been an avenue that people had looked at when they were, looking at Caixa buffs and nerfs before, is that turns out Caixa has a very good laning phase because she's so durable. It's hard to all-in her. Which, like, okay, sure. Yep, that makes sense. We're going to look at Vayne later on down the line. I have it posted down for posterity. And Vayne is very squishy compared to Caixa. And Caixa is arguably more nimble than Vayne. That's debatable, to be fair. It's debatable. But I would say, though, that like Caixa is the kind of example of a champion that I would have liked to see have high health scaling because she wants to play as a quasi-assassin in the late game, right? She wants to Killer Instinct over into the back line and go pop some people. It's like, I could totally see Caixa having 2100 health or so in the late game. Maybe not Draven levels of 2200, but yeah, I think Caixa having slightly lower level 1 health and slightly higher level 18 health would fit my idea of what this champion would do fairly. Regardless, very high level 1 health. Honestly, considering the base 600, pretty mediocre level 18 health, but whatever. Kog'Maw actually is, I would argue, a reasonably safe champion. Kog'Maw has 2 on-demand skills for last hitting, has a nice AoE slow, gets to get bonus range on purpose, and sitting at 565 post-buff is a totally reasonable health total. Scales up to a pretty moderate 2195, want to point out, or sorry, 2095. Want to point out it's actually 1 less than the Caixa, which I kind of find interesting. But yeah, less base health than the Caixa. Is kind of cute. So it's actually in all cases always less durable than Caixa, which I'm not sure Kog'Maw deserves to have less than her outside of late game when he sits at 700 range yet again. And to be fair, at level 9 he sits at 800 range as well, or so, because of Bioarcane Barrage. So there's also the case for saying, hey, Kog'Maw is functionally Caitlyn in the late game. You can go ahead and clamp down that health growth. And to a certain point, that's also kind of true, because, this is now a fairly acceptable base health. But here you go, another 6 to 3% broken record and all that. Misfortune is a lane bully. Once again, she's a champion without very good defensive tools. Make It Rain is only so good, though not terrible. Has to sit there and channel for things like bullet time. I think it's totally acceptable for MF to have very high level 18 health. MF and Draven would be my top 2, and Caixa would be my number 3 probably, for the 3 champions who most deserve high health totals, and MF and Draven are there, and I'm totally for that. As far as level 1's concerned, I think actually fairly reasonable as well. I think it's okay. Again, for a champion without any hard CC whatsoever, right? Like Draven has Stand Aside, for example, and has to walk everywhere to do anything. I think it's totally fine for MF to even crest 600 health. Like the fact that Caixa has more health than MF at level 1 is a bit of a head scratcher to me. I don't think that quite fits. Again, I'm kind of railing on the level 1 Caixa health because I think that's out of line, and I'm railing on the Aphelios base armor and MR because I also think that's out of line. But for a lot of these, the stat, I think, makes sense for where the champion lives. Next up, we get Sivir, which is another champion. There we go. This is one with a 2, right? And they didn't round down by 2, which I think is totally okay. You coulda. It's not like 2 health really would have mattered, but I think it's also reasonable to just like, yeah, let's just not do that. Whatever. But regardless, again, 6 to 3% more health. Sivir is a champion that I could also totally see have 2100 or more health at level 18. A champion that can never gain bonus range and never has blink tools. Has a spell shield to dodge 1 ability, but I think Sivir could overall deserve to be slightly tanky. As for the early game, probably could deserve to be slightly squishy since her wave clear could be so annoying. So yeah, 530 is slightly on the low end. I don't know. She's got, I would argue, fairly average health, right? This is Kog'Maw health. This is, I think, Misfortune health. It's fairly average, all things considered. I honestly see a champion who could stand to scale a bit higher, but realistically saying, hey, your health scaling is up by 2 more, so you have 34 more HP at level 18. Yeah, it doesn't do all that much. It's just it really is very minor. I enjoy really fine details, even when the fine details are not terribly important. It's just something that I enjoy thinking about and talking about. Not a huge deal, but yeah. Here is Twitch. Twitch is another champion who, again, I think could deserve... This is interesting, right? Because Twitch, again, goes into hypercarry mode, and much like Kog'Maw, gets to sit and hit the entire team at 700 bonus range, and is a champion that I think, yeah, can totally deserve to sit at low health in the late game. Not cresting over 2100, I think, is totally acceptable for what Twitch does, because he absolutely destroys teams, and the whole point is trying to get to him, and if you're getting to him, you should be rewarded with a kill on the Twitch. I mean, Twitch could have been a sub 2k champion pre-buff, and I think that would have actually fit the identity reasonably well of what would have made this champion, I think, fair to interact with. That said, though, Crest's 600 HP at level 1 makes him very, very high. If his base armor is not out of line, this lines up with what I've seen, which is that Twitch tends to be a fairly good early laner because he has the health to withstand that one extra auto attack. I mean, let's think about this, right? Twitch has 612 health, Aphelios has 530, and Twitch has more armor than him. Like, Twitch can just let Aphelios hit him 3 times and still have more durability than this champion. And that matters a lot, right? When you can take an all in and just tank 2 more auto attacks. Not every champion's Aphelios, don't get me wrong. Some of them are Vayne, some of them are Caixa, whatever. But when you can just tank 1 or 2 extra auto attacks, this makes your all in a whole lot better than someone else's, because you win a fight that they lose on base stats. And that's okay. I think it's totally reasonable for champions to have these differences. That's completely supported by the game and a cool thing to have happen. I just want that reflected in the health bar itself and not in armor. But regardless, yep, Twitch is a pretty tanky boy in the early game, and not a very tanky boy in the late game, which I think is fairly reasonable for Twitch overall, since he has very, very bad crowd control, no burst whatsoever, has to there an auto attack, totally fair for his base health to be high so that he can actually have a combat pattern in the early game, and then, yeah, go down to squishier levels because, hey, late game Twitch is an absolute nightmare. Varus, right? A base 500 health champion. Totally on board with that, right? Varus, much like Caitlyn, a bit like Ashe, has an sort of obnoxiously high base attack range, so you are baseline squishy as a champion. But in the late game, doesn't actually have absurd range tools, right? Doesn't have Twitch stuff, doesn't have Kog'Maw stuff, doesn't even have Caitlyn range. Varus is a champion who I think starting at 5 or 530 is totally reasonable, but scaling up to 2150 would have also been totally fine as well. Where I think this is an interesting lever and one that could totally be used cleverly to reinforce, okay, this champion's, is annoying to have to deal with in lane. Well, we can nerf level 1 health, but in a late game team fight, Varus doesn't have those kinds of tools outside of just throwing Qs, which is generally not enough to succeed, so the scaling health can be higher. And yeah, you crest around level 10 or 12 or something, and in the mid game, every AD carry has the same health total. I think that's fine, personally. But yeah, I mean, I'm a fan of how Varus' level 1 health works out. Again, I'm talking about more the champion holistically as opposed to what the buffs mean, because it's the exact same 63% on every single champion because they all got 30 plus 2 scaling health. We then go to Xayah. Xayah, as you can see, has very, very high health, and as a result tends to be quite the bully. Has hard crowd control, has poke through minions, has wave clear, right? Is there any... I know that we have seen Xayah nerfed before. I believe the last time Xayah was nerfed, they nerfed, at least her durability, they nerfed her armor specifically. But as you can see, I mean, she has above average for an AD carry health. Right? It could have easily been a health nerf instead of an armor nerf and had similar effects and had the health bar line up to what you would probably expect to see for a champion that has so many good tools in the early landing phase. This champion probably could have sat at 530 base and came up to 560 now. Again, an armor nerf does the same kind of thing. It's just more invisible, right? Right, we have all these data tables of all these health totals of all these AD carries, but we actually don't know which one's more durable than the other without looking up their armor somewhere else and then doing all the multiplication, which is why I really am a fan of templating base stats, at least based on class, but even across all champions, on the armor and MR level, or at least having those sum to the same number and letting designers tweak the armor MR balance for interesting things like, character flavor or even beyond, right? It could be for good design reasons as well. Like Talon has weak armor because they don't want him to be a top laner, so he has high MR and low armor. That's totally, like, to me, that's totally fine. It's just that's part of the base armor MR budget. It's just skewed this way. I would like all the AD carries to have absolutely zero armor MR skew and just say, hey, base health is how we keep your level 1, 2, 3 laning phase not absurd. I would still support that. I still want to champion that. Maybe one day, who knows? It's a pretty minor thing, all things considered, but I like the clarity gains. But yeah, Xayah, generally speaking, very durable in the early game. Does go fairly weak durability in the late game. And to be fair, she has self-peel on the kit, right? That ultimate is really, really, really good for dodging all-ins. You immediately turn it into hard crowd control on several targets in a lot of cases. I mean, Xayah is very good at kiting back. I think Xayah is a champion who I think rightfully deserves under 2100 late game base health. I mean, similar to Aphelios, right? I think Aphelios deserves low health early and late game because he's a menace at all times, right? He's very kitey at all times. I think Xayah could have deserved an early game nerf, but again, whatever. It's just kind of a wide buff going on. So now we go up to Lucian. So Lucian didn't get health buff. So here is Lucian's health table, right? Lucian at 571 is a fairly moderate, slightly high level 1 health total. Lucian seems to be positioned to want to be a lane bully. The Q for poke is not great. 500 base attack range is very low. It's a champ without any poke and has to actually land auto attacks to really harass in any meaningful way. I think it's totally acceptable for, this champion to have a reasonably high base health. I think he's pretty well positioned. If he was taking the same buffs as everyone else, he'd be at 600 at level 1, which would be very, very high. It'd be higher than some melee champions, though, to be fair, lower armor and lower MR. But want to point out that his health scaling is actually very, very low. Even, pre-buff being 2033 is, I guess, to be fair, slightly higher than Xayah. Slightly higher than Varus, slightly higher than Twitch. Okay, we'll take it back. 2033 is actually on the high end for most things. Finally, MF's the first one that beats it. So, but not getting buffed by 55 bonus health is actually, would have put him at almost 2100. Just, as a note, right? That's where he would have been. Would Lucian probably deserve to sit below 2100 in the late game? I don't know. I think it's probably about where he gets to live. He has like very, very high mobility in the late game, and plus the culling. I think it's reasonable for Lucian to be a little bit squishier. All things considered, right? Like MF and Ashe and stuff probably all deserve more durability than him because they don't kite nearly as well. So yeah, sure, Lucian can remain a low durability AD carry. I think this ends up being positioned actually pretty well overall. I think these base stats make sense. But anyway, let's talk about the actual buff. Now that we can go back to it, which is Lucian. The Light Slinger second critical shot damage has no longer been cut to 75%. Now, the second shot still deals reduced damage to champions, although it doesn't do reduced damage to minions, but it now at least crits at full power. So here is, because it does 50%, 55%, 60% damage, you now deal, crit the first attack, crit the second is this amount of damage. Before it was this. Now I saw a comment on Reddit which was that Lucian's buffs, it was, wow, so weird how they tried to not buff Lucian for top lane and yet Lucian's buffs are bigger. And this was an upvoted comment. If you have 100% crit chance, you do 4 to 5% more damage on Light Slinger double shots. If you don't double shot, obviously there's no buff. Lucian doesn't tend to build that much crit, right? Top lane Lucian is Ruin King, maybe a Reaver, Cleaver sometimes. Okay, Rapid Fire Cannon comes in at some point, so you're getting like a maybe 50% crit chance in a lot of cases. So it's a 2% damage bump, maybe 2.5% damage bump on your auto attacks after the spell. Yeah, I'm not buying this buff is very big. This is almost a non-buff. Now, I am happy that this is being cleaned up, because I think you already deal reduced damage on the second attack anyway on champions. Why are you double nerfing him? Why are you killing crit builds? Stop it, Riot. Let there be build diversity. It's not like Lucian is, ignoring crit items, ignoring other items to build crit. He can stand to build them. It's okay. So I am glad, just on a mechanics level, that this extra rule is gone. Super happy about it. As a buff, this means almost nothing. Now, fixed a bug where Lightslinger basic attacks would not fire if the target got out of range. Great, that's a real buff, right? Getting that second attack off because they walked away, hugely big deal, super about it. That's a way bigger buff than this is. And as a quick reiteration, yeah, 2033 puts him fairly low for a modern-day marksman now, so his scaling is quite a bit lower than everyone else's. I wouldn't have hated to see Lucian only get the 2 health growth, just to gain 34 more HP and stop at, 70 whatever. I guess it would have been 64 total bonus health. I'm going to put him at, almost exactly 100, regardless. If he really gained 30 plus 0.2, or 30 plus 2 rather. But whatever. I mean, that's just for like, hey, isn't it fun to have things grouped together? I think Lucian's base stats are more or less fine. 30 more health level 18 is not a big deal. That is not something you should ever actually consider for a balance purpose. So it's not a big deal. But this is a very, very small buff. This probably means more. Next up, Callista changes. Now, top Callista, pretty much 0 points W. Bot Callista, frequently 0 points W, but they could put points into it. And so they're continually putting more and more and more buffs in its ability until maybe at some point people will finally put a point into the button. 14% targets max health at level 1, and the Sentinel costs no mana. Callista, will you put a point in the ability finally? At this point, I mean, I've said it every single time they buffed the spell to not be garbage at level 1, and I thought it was going to be time. And people still aren't doing it. But this time, surely it's enough now, right? Well, Callista. Oh, and by the way, Lucian's win rate was 47% over the last month in top lane and 49.2% this patch in bottom lane. I double-checked both last month and this patch. There is basically no change, but because top lane Lucian, Callista, and Tristana were much less popular, I looked back over a bigger data set. There wasn't really a lot of variance. These numbers are going to be fairly accurate, even though they are overlapping other patches as well. So 47% as a top laner. Lucian is clearly an objectively weak performing top laner. Not that he can't be frustrating. Again, we talked about this. Champions can be frustrating even if they're weak. Lucian can be one of those top lane. But 49.2 in bot lane, Lucian will end up losing win rate this patch. I'm going to make a very firm statement that Lucian will lose win rate this patch because his compatriots, these AD carries, are getting buffed by more than he's getting buffed by. Now, it is very hard to use someone like Ziggs or Yasuo or Cassiopeia as our dummy variable to like use that to track AD carry win rate growth because there's just not enough games those champions. Marksmen are still far more popular in that role. That looking at, 350 Cassiopeia games and trying to say, hey, was it a 0.5% win rate bump is not reliable. That's within margin. That's within your confidence interval. So you're not really going to get that here. But Lucian, however, is an exceptionally popular bot laner, and that is a very good measuring stick. Yes, he did technically get buffed. There's some level of that happening. There's some level you have to keep in mind when you think about the other win rates. But when we look at Lucian's win rate at 10-10 compared to 10-11, I am making the strong prediction that even though he's getting objectively buffed, his win rate will go down because his cohort is getting stronger by more. So he will go sub 49 next patch. I will be shocked if this 4% damage on only 100% crit builds and only on Lightslinger. So, a real build has 25 or 50% crit, so it's 2 to 2.5% more damage. And even then, it's only on like 1/3 of all his auto attacks ever, so it's a 1% damage buff. Yeah, I don't care. I will take this every time. Next up is Callista. So this is Callista's base attack damage, plus assuming you did put a point in W. I'm using her total health as the example target because it's close enough to a generic other champion. It is a pretty substantial damage bump. Obviously, the ability itself does 40% more damage, which is substantial. Very rarely do abilities gain 40% more damage, but in this case, it certainly did. And you can see, that carries about half the weight of this attack overall. The 40% buff is a 17% buff in the real world where you're landing a real auto attack, but that is not trivial. That is 20-something damage in the first several levels. And overall, again, this is a thing that is worth, a pretty solid 70 damage on hit, right? 500 health on a target, which is the bare minimum for a bot laner in any realistic case. 14% of 500 health is 70 damage. This is a 70 damage ability. This is finally as much damage as a regular point-and-click skill. So maybe worth casting finally. Obviously, as time goes on and people have 2,000 health, it's worth, 280. HP before getting modified to 360, but it doesn't scale up anything. So like, 80% max health, it's so high. It's like, yeah, but Lightslinger just does that much damage all the time. Like, Lightslinger does 360 in the late game. This does 360 and doesn't scale. So, I mean, not really. Oh, and it requires your teammate to hit them, right? So it's like, yeah, this is actually, like, the numbers are high, but it's not that good of an ability. That's why people aren't learning it. But now Sentinel costs no mana. That's a great buff to me. And overall should be a pretty big hit. Callista, what's interesting is looking at the data, ignoring W seemed to be a reasonably successful like build. So yeah, Callista going into learning W again is going to, like if you learn W now versus not learning W now, it wasn't that big of a win rate difference. Learning W now obviously is going to be an objective upgrade. So the Callistas who were leveling W, at least 1 point, which is a decent percentage of them, are going to see an obvious objective win rate increase. People who were ignoring Callista W, well, considering that this was their only buff, Callistas who ignore W are getting weaker for the same reason that Lucian's getting weaker, because everyone else is getting stronger. So it's interesting, right? Because ignoring W was theoretically the correct build, win rate wise. Learning W is objectively getting stronger to the point where it probably crosses ignoring W at this point. It's probably worth to put a point in W at level 3 or 4 at this point now. The Sentinel is free. That's kind of nice. You do get a full ability's worth of damage on hit now. That's pretty good. You get more damage from the W than you'd get from 1 point in Pierce. So, I don't know if Cliss is still getting more than the other marksman did as far as a look at her health table. She now has full on... Oh, by the way, Callista also has very low base armor, but she has very, very high armor growth. And as you can see, very, very high health growth. Now, Callista is another champion, right, who is absurdly annoying to deal with in the early game. Callista being, at 535, being at, a Phelios level, at Caitlyn level, I think is totally reasonable for Callista to be in, right? Because she will just run you down with Rend and your life is over. I think it is totally fair for Callista to be at this part. Callista is at the weak end of level 1 stats, but... I think it's actually totally fair as well. Callista has really no good long-range tools, has no good burst tools at all, has to sit there and auto-attack. Yes, she can kite somewhat, but she can't turn invisible like Vayne. She can't tumble around to dodge skill shots. I think it's totally acceptable for Callista to have among the highest overall health total. Because think about someone like Draven, right? Draven with a spinning axe and rapid fire cannon can chunk you for 500 and then back off and catch the axe. Callista cannot do this kind of thing. Rapid fire cannon is not really useful based on her kit. She doesn't have that much value out of just autoing you once compared to someone like Draven. The Q poke is okay, but it's single target, which is fairly weak. I think Callista having really, really absurd health growth, it totally makes sense based on how the kit operates in the late game, and I am about it. As you can see, she was a 46% win rate top laner and a 50% win rate bot laner, which will probably go down very slightly in win rate as a result of this patch. Let's go to our next one, which is Vayne getting a flat 20% total AD bump on the Q. Now, bot lane Vayne, max W first. I didn't check top lane Vayne, but worth pointing out that Vayne is a very high win rate champion. Even sitting at about 50% in top lane, sitting well above 50% in the bottom lane. And Vayne now has the dubious honor of being the objectively lowest base health marksman in the game. Now, I don't completely know what Quinn and Teemo and Jace have, but of all the champions we looked at here, the ones that are considered conventional bot laners, Vayne is now the absolute lowest base health. Asterisk, don't know what her armor is, but oh well. That said, I think Vayne is allowed to be a Phelios tier and Caitlyn tier on base health because, well, she has a very low cooldown dash, she scales incredibly well, and she eventually turns invisible. Like, I'm totally down for her base health barely cresting 2k at level 18. This is one of the champions that can probably have the lowest level 18 base health, and that's cool to me. Vayne definitely very, very squishy, 515, exceptionally low. She is now, again, has that dubious honor that can definitely be felt. But considering that, she can condemn the Leona and tumble out of the way, I mean, yeah, she does have to be in this kind of state in order to be a fair experience for her opponents, because Vayne does scale so well and does chase people down if she ever gets the upper hand. So that's fine. I think it's okay that she has that honor. I think it's reasonable for her to be this champion. Now, in actual stats, Aphelios is still weaker because his base armor and MR are so much lower, but the health total lies to you. As far as the actual Q damage, a flat 10% on the AD ratio is going to keep this at a pretty solid 7 to 6% overall. That pretty much won't change because it's going to scale with base damage, aka your base AD, as well as any bonus AD you buy, and it's going to be that simple 6-ish% more damage on the Q, which in bot lane is maxed second. This is, I would say, again, a smaller buff than happened to the other AD carries. It is 6% more damage, not on silver bolts, and not on the majority of your auto attacks, but on some of them, which is fine. Vayne probably loses maybe 0.5% win rate. Vayne is another good example. We can look at both Vayne. We can probably look at Callista as well, and we can look at Lucian. I would guess that all three of those champions will lose win rate, which will show us that the buffs to the other AD carries were bigger than this buff was to all of them individually. Obviously, they are objectively stronger for things like top lane. There's no reason to think they wouldn't gain win rate for their top lane plays. Although Callista probably least likely to, since the W is probably not getting learned in that lane. But for everyone else, some degree of buff there. The fourth and final change is a base attack speed ratio bump to Tristana. Base attack speed is simply a more damage modifier. It is very obviously, in all cases, definitively better than the Lucian buff. There is no question at all. This is 4% more attack damage in all cases, as opposed to 4% more attack damage with a 100% crit chance after casting a spell. Gee, I wonder which one's better. It's not close at all. Tristana's buff is enough to actually maybe be better than raw health. 4% more auto attack damage, slightly higher chance you can get that fourth stack off on your explosive charge, slightly better last hitting under turret, animations and whatnot. Those all matter quite a lot. I will probably take 4% more damage over 4% more durability on a marksman. Tristana probably gains the most out of all of the bot laners in this thing. That said, Tristana as a top laner doesn't tend to get to free fire on the opposing top laner, right? It tends to be a bit more poke based. That's why I think they chose this buff, because it tends to benefit a conventional marksman slightly more than a top laner that eventually can't be a duelist anyway, because once, Maokai has Thornmail, he probably starts to drain tank you to a certain point. I'm not sure that's really true, but maybe. Regardless, this is a very, very nice buff to Tristana. For reference, this is Tristana's health totals, right? 560 puts her at a completely reasonable middle ground. Tristana is another one that probably could have sat maybe slightly low, right? She has the ability to all in you, has very good wave clear, has a very good escape tool that can beat things like Blitzcrank Hook, which is very powerful, right? Grows to a lot of range. Like, I'm glad she sits below 2100 at max level, because she has 700 range at level 18 with a resetting escape. Triss could even go arguably even lower at level 18, and I would be comfortable with that as an AD carry player. But a solid middle ground of 560 is a fine middle ground, and you can kind of see that, yeah, I mean, Triss, because Triss, spawns at, 525, I think? She's slightly low on range. I think it's reasonable to have sort of a middling health total. I'm pretty happy with Tristana's health total overall. Again, 4% more damage. And one thing I wanted to include, because I think it's actually very important to do, is to take a look at this. Because people very often buy too much attack speed on Tristana, and they overcap their attack speed. The more base attack speed you have, the more likely you are to overcap your attack speed. So what this is looking at Tristana's base attack speed, her attack speed growth on her base stats, and rapid fire at the appropriate rank, maxed second. How much more attack speed do you have to buy in runes, in items, in buffs from supports and other champions to reach the attack speed cap? And notably, it now takes 13% less bonus attack speed to reach the cap. So with old Tristana, 146 bonus attack speed got you to the cap. Now 46% was what you got from Berserker's Greaves and the Alacrity rune, not the Alacrity rune, the stat shard for attack speed. I mean, Alacrity is another 18%, which puts us at now, 85% to go, which meant 2 Zeals got you most of the way there, right? If you went Blade of the Rune King, that's 25. So that's the numbers we're looking with. Now we're looking at 133% puts you at overcap. Now, once again, 45% attack speed comes from boots that you always buy and the rune you always take. And so you actually only need to buy, if my math is not going to fail me, 88% bonus attack speed, not counting boots, to completely hit the attack speed cap. If your teammate's running Ardent Sensor, drop that by another 30 or whatever, which means you actually can only buy one Zeal item. But I also want to point out that, like, at a certain point, does going from 2 to 2.5 attacks per second matter? Oftentimes that answer is no. Please stop buying double Zeal and Tristana. As we can see here, you're just hitting the cap practically so much of the time. Please be smart about this. That has been your PSA on Tristana for the day. Now, Zeal, Fenmancer, Rapid Fire Cannon, Static Shape, and Hurricane all got 2% bonus movement speed. I wouldn't have hated to see this just sit at 7% just to be flat with everyone else. Although I understand the idea of just, giving this a flat 2% to be, the same buff as everything else. I get why they did it. It's not like it's a huge problem. Although it is still just weird. This item just uniquely has more move speed for kind of no reason. I mean, okay, Fenmancer has its own move speed buff. This gives you bonus range, so you don't need as much kiting. This lets you kind of fire and forget as well with the Energize. So, like, there's something there. I get it. I don't know. It still feels a little weird to me. It's a super minor thing. It's a very small quibble. But yeah, marksmen now run about 2% faster. Considering marksmen tend to have fairly low base movement speeds, just in general, ranged champions do, and marksmen on top of that tend to as well. Mages tend to have more base move speed, but they also tend to have, less move speed in their itemization, such as what marksmen get to do. That is okay. But yeah, I mean, 2% more move speed is going to be, functionally 6 or 7 move speed, which puts you up basically one tier. Champions have move speed in increments of 5. 525 up to 555, not counting like Janna, who I think is like the one unique exception. So this puts you up like one more tier, which is actually not that bad, right? Tier and a half almost. Pretty reasonable. Also, by the way, that this will multiply boosted speed. So, if you have plus 45 off of, 330, you're at 375. 2% is 7 or so, 7 and change. So, this actually gets you basically a champion tier and a half of movement speed, which is actually pretty meaningful. This will mean you can start to outrun Ziggs or Cassiopeia or whatever when you couldn't before. Even though this is very small, it's actually not that trivial. This is actually not bad. VFX updates to Cassiopeia. ARAM balance changes to a bunch of champions here as well. Earth balance changes to a bunch of champions as well. Rainbow fluffs, get that before June 30th. Get in there. Bunch of bug fixes, upcoming skins and chromas, and look at how pretty they are. Honor 5 chroma. Already have these, but cool stuff. Maybe get some cool, try to get some cool chromas. We'll see if that's possible. Okay, so we are over an hour in. Let's TLDR patch 10.11. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Let's talk about it. Alrighty, first up, Volibear rework exists. Cool stuff. Fiddlesticks can now fear if he T-poses, but it takes 2 seconds to T-pose. Also, 50% more damage to minions with a W is a really big deal for landing phase. That should do a lot to solo lane Fiddlesticks. Gangplank gets a pretty moderate amount of more attack speed, but can't double stack Sheen off of a barrel chain. So you can't get free bonus damage. Probably ends up being pretty close to power neutral. This could easily be a bigger nerf than this is a buff, but it helps Gangplank fight melee champions a bit more. Graves loses a very, very small amount of damage. This will barely move the needle, and is, in my opinion, too small of a nerf to Graves. Hecarim gets a pretty moderate buff to his Rampage base damage, but because of this nerf, actually has overall less damage to minions, even after this base damage is considered. Obviously, faster jungle clear, obviously more PvP damage. Already a pretty reasonable win rate champion, and probably does quite well as a jungler as a result. Hecarim, probably a bit overtuned, but we'll see. Janna losing a pretty meaningful up to 20 damage off the W is going to mean quite a lot. Very big deal here to Janna, and will still be on the strong side, but probably banned a whole lot less. Caixa, in addition to getting some more bonus health, which we'll see down the line, gets a 14% higher AD ratio on the Q, and extra range on Killer Instincts at ranks 2 and 3, which should be pretty meaningful. Caixa is arguably the worst performing marksman right now, and thus deserves extra compensation buffs, which I'm totally happy to see. Or just extra buffs in general. Lux gets an extra 3/4 of a second on the slow after detonating the E, which I think is bigger on paper than it actually is in practice, but certainly is going to be a nice little small win rate bump to the champion. 2 seconds cooldown increase on Scout of the Week is going to be pretty big on Syndra. She might drop below 50% win rate as a result, but still, honestly, if you're good at her, she's completely viable. Talon has been doing Q max first and using that healing to gain a ton of extra regeneration. Because it's just so easy to last at all the minions and get all the last hits and get a ton of health. So end of the day, costing 1/3 more mana on the Q is going to be really meaningful, and getting what ends up being between half and 1/3 less health in the early game off that spell is going to mean quite a lot. We're going to end up seeing probably a pretty big, like 25 to 15% less overall regen, even if you count his base health regen on top of this, which is going to be pretty big. He's going to lose a lot here. Next up, a whole bunch of champions, a whole bunch of marksmen, get 30 base health and 2 more health growth, which ends up adding up to 64 total health at level 18. This ends up being 6% more health at level 1 and 3% more health by level 18 to a bunch of champions. Most champs, I would say, have actually a pretty good base stat array, or base health array for their roles in the early game. Also want to point out a lot of these have typos in them. They're bad copy pastes. There's a different actually set of numbers for most of these. That'll get fixed at some point down the line, I'm sure. Lucian gets a nothing buff. This bug fix is good, where Lightslinger will actually fire if a target walks out of range, but this means basically nothing. Even if you have a 100% crit chance, this equates to about 5% more total damage off of both attacks. It's fairly meaningless. As far as Callista is concerned, if you ignore W, this means nothing, obviously, but a 40% damage bump to rank 1 of the ability is a really big deal, and probably gets you to pull 1 point in the ability early game, and Sentinels are now free, so get them out there. Vayne gets about 6% overall more damage as a result of this buff, or maybe more like 7% more damage as a result of this buff, but it's only on your tumbles. It doesn't affect Silver Bolts, doesn't affect, the non-tumble auto attacks, but is a, moderately sized buff. And Tristana gets a pretty solid 4% more attack speed, which is very, very, very good, and in my opinion is the single biggest buff to marksman in this patch. Tristana will be exceptional. I'm going to say that the Lucian, Callista, and Vayne buffs are each smaller than the health buffs that all of these champions got, and thus, as a result, these 3 champions will all lose win rate in bot lane and gain win rate in top lane, which is ironic a little bit, but to be fair, Lucian is a pretty good performer, and so is Vayne. And I think Callista was actually doing fine and arguably got the biggest buffs of these. Tristana, I think, will be on the strong side, and realistically, people should be playing her a lot as a result. 2% more move speed on Zeal, pretty meaningful. Gives about 7 move speed than any reasonable situation that marksmen are in, which is actually pretty nice. That is enough to be felt and enough to really make a difference. That's it for the patch rundown. Thank you all so much for tuning into the video. If you made it this far, thank you so much. I appreciate y'all. I've had to read the comments. I don't get all of them, but I try to keep in touch with all of you. Hit me up on Twitter if you have other questions, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.